This is again part of my series on the data requests that I made to the European Commission about the EIC Accelerator, and especially unpublished data, how it works internally, how does the EIC fund invest, how much has it invested, how fast or how slow is it. So you can see all the details on my website. You can look at the link below. But let's just start with the most important bit, which is, does the EIC fund actually pay out the equity that you request? Because we all know the EIC Accelerator is offering grant funding, which is non-dilutive, and also EIC fund funding, which is obviously dilutive because it is an equity investment. So let me just give you the high-level statistics. 50%, that means half of the companies that had EIC Accelerator equity funding approved in 2021 have received at least a partial payments. That means half of the companies that have been approved equity funding in 2021 actually haven't received any equity funding yet. That means over 5 years, nothing has happened. There are many reasons for that. Of course, the EIC fund has to make sure that this is a reasonable investment. Maybe some of these companies don't exist anymore. Maybe some of these companies never raised another financing round, which is also a possibility, especially considering the market crash that actually followed after 2021. But then if we go to 2022, we can see that the equity paid rate actually rises to 56%, and then 2023 it drops to 32%, and then only 13% have at least received a partial payment from the batch of 2024, and then from the batch of 2025 we have an equity paid rate of 1.4%. Of course, things have changed. The data is a few months old, but generally speaking, it takes at least 1 to 3 years for a company to obtain funding from the EIC fund. But this is just the reality of how it goes with the EIC fund. But there's also exceptions where you can see that, okay, a company actually received the funding within 1 year and then another company maybe in 2 years. So it always depends on the company itself as well, because clearly if the company is not raising a funding round, then the EIC fund is probably going to say, we're going to wait a little bit until we invest. And then again, this data set actually confirmed a previous analysis of mine, which is how much grant funding do companies actually apply for. The grant, the maximum is 2.5 million. And you can see that we have by far the majority applying for more than 2.4, which means that the average is about 2.3 million overall. So most companies go for the maximum grant. After receiving all the data, of course, I didn't publish everything because there's no need to associate certain funding amounts, actually names of the companies. But there were some interesting cases where the EIC fund actually did take a lead investor role. There was one particular case where I believe the funding round was about 30 million and the EIC fund actually invested 15 million. So they invested half of the entire round, which they relatively rarely do because the EIC fund likes to take a smaller stake. They want to be a co-investor. They rarely take the lead, at least at this point, at least according to the data. But in this particular case, they effectively took the lead by taking on 50% of the entire round, even though the official publication of the company named 3 other investors as the lead investors and said that the EIC fund was only a co-investor. But in this case, if you look at the data, they invested half the round. 3 other investors invested the rest. Clearly, the EIC fund took the lead. And there are also a few interesting cases where companies obtained more of the funding they actually asked for. So, for example, there's one company, they had approved 15 million in funding, and they ended up getting 30 million. And another very similar case, also 15 million, and they ended up getting approved 29 million. So you can see that the EIC fund is making, I want to say, executive decisions in the background. With the grant, it's much more straightforward. If you apply for a certain grant and you actually get this grant approved, you can expect that this is what you get. So what you apply for is probably what you're going to get. I haven't heard of any change where grant was increased or reduced, but with the EIC fund, there are decisions that might be happening downstream.